Thanks for tuning in, Mountaineer Nation, to another edition of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports. The end of the 2025 regular season left a sour taste in my mouth and probably many within Mountaineer Nation. I want to start off, because we're coming off Thanksgiving, with a little bit of thanks. I want to say thanks to everybody who tuned in yesterday for my first ever, whenever this launches, this will be Monday, so Saturday, my first ever live stream, live play-by-play with commentary performance on a West Virginia game on my channel. It was a lot of fun. It was a whole lot of talking for 3.5 hours, just doing it by myself, but it just seemed like 3.5 hours just absolutely flew by, given the up-tempo nature of both teams, and then just still a lot of stuff to talk about, off the field, things going around college football with it being rivalry week. It was a lot of fun. So if you were any one of the 5,500 plus who have tuned in and listened to, even if it was just a minute of that live stream, I really appreciate it. That was just awesome. Did get me some subscribers to my channel. So if you're new and tuning into one of my pre-recorded videos, I really appreciate it. And hopefully I can do something like that in the future. Maybe if it's as soon as this basketball season, baseball season, to do something more like that. That was a lot of fun. So thanks for also to everybody who engaged. I think I had 84 live chats on that, even some Texas Tech fans weighing in, so that was pretty cool to see some other Big 12 brethren tuning into the stream. So now the regular season is over. West Virginia is 4-8. They're not going to a bowl game. Before we move on, because news in college football moves at the speed of light, I'm sure that as this video is posted on Monday, December 1st, that we are going to get some sort of news from someone. Doesn't matter whether they're a player of very high caliber on West Virginia's team or very low caliber, so on and so forth. There will be an entering of the transfer portal, as is the nature of the beast of this time of year, with teams that aren't playing in bowl games or conference championship games and so on and so forth. So with that, we are going to quickly turn the page so fast into 2026. This is what is like kind of crazy that I don't like about college football, that we don't have a chance to review, to reflect, to see what went right, what went wrong, what really did happen, because man, you can think already back to yourselves, what happened 12 months ago that affected the last 12 months? What happened 6 months ago that now affected this regular season? I think that we have to take this time right quick, as some folks like to say, and just say, hey, let's chronicle it. Let's go back to the very beginning, and what were some of those things, those life lessons I feel like that we could have, that were bigger picture things that just go beyond just the scope of one season, one year. Is this a trend that we've seen for, through coaching staffs, between Coach Rodriguez, back to Neil Brown, back to Coach Holgerson, all the way to the first stint of Coach Rodriguez, and so on and so forth? What are some of the things that we can take away from this year, and what happened, so that West Virginia can be a better program, a better team in 2026 and beyond? So let's walk through it, because I think this is what we can quickly forget of all of the dominoes that affected it being a 4-8 season, the worst season that West Virginia's had since 2013, when it went 4-8. Its second full season in the Big 12 conference, and West Virginia also sustained Saturday against Texas Tech its first shutout loss at home since October 28th of 1995. And I heard the guys from Ear Sports, Mike Kazaza and Chris Anderson, earlier today saying that this was the worst loss in Mountaineer history in over 100 years, of a 49-point deficit. That would just absolutely ugly. I don't know where they got that statistic, but just whenever a loss in similar fashion happens the year prior in Lubbock and it costs a head coach his job, among other things, I think that we need to just take a moment to see all of the things that have happened, and let's analyze it. So going all the way back, I had to look this up to get the right dates, because this was the narrative that we started to hear once we got into the throes, I feel like, of October, is that West Virginia got to the game late in recruiting. And this is true to a certain extent. If you look at the way that the month of December of 2024 went into January. So Neil Brown was fired back when this video was posted to the day of Monday. So December 1st of 2024, Neil Brown was fired after West Virginia lost to Texas Tech. So West Virginia on December 5th signed its high school recruiting class. And there were some guys who initially signed, or they lost out on commitments on signing day, that it just put together, you were thankful that West Virginia's former coach, then former 4 days old, Neil Brown, but also the assistants, most of whom were not going to be coaching the team in 2025, held that 2025 recruiting class together. So namely, a quarterback in the name of Scotty Fox, who played a pivotal role in this season, or some highly touted recruits like Taylor Brown, for example, who was a guy 4 stars, I think, according to 247. West Virginia lost out on some guys like a DeAndre Desenor, who went to NC State, Aiden Buchanan, who ended up going to North Carolina, who came from a really good high school and good counsel, and the effect of that decommitment from West Virginia and how that affected Gavin Crawford, who eventually left for Virginia Tech. Montaven Quisenberry, I think he decommitted during the 2024 season, ending up at Kentucky, but it's just like the high school recruiting class of 2020, December of 24, kind of fell apart. You tried to hold it on as best you could, but you weren't getting anything you were getting what you were getting out of those Neil Brown recruited players, but it wasn't like you had a coach already waiting in the wings, because 12 days later is when Coach Rodriguez was hired by West Virginia. So West Virginia couldn't go back to the well, really, it feels like, and make any sort of a difference that it would make any sort of an impact for this 2025 season with high school recruits, and could backfill kind of that way. They did that a little bit, it felt like, once ever Coach Rodriguez and some of the assistant coach got hired on. They backfilled into the later signing day period into the spring, but nobody really of significance that played such a dramatic role into 2025, and we'll have to see how that affects the roster building of 2026 and beyond. So once Coach Rodriguez was hired on December 12th, West Virginia just still had this 6-day window, this gray period, before it played in the Scooter's Coffee Frisco Bowl, that West Virginia was really knowing who was in and who was out for 2025. And as we know, right then and there after the Coffee Bowl, over the course of mid-January, while Coach Rodriguez is trying to hire his staff and all of these assistants across the board, over a handful of highly, impact players that could have been useful for 2025 and beyond went elsewhere. C.J. Donaldson, Hudson Clement, Traylon Ray, Tomas Remek, Johnny Williams, Kyle Altuner, Josiah Trotter, and Trey Lathan. Now, some of those guys, you could argue West Virginia was better off without. I didn't think that Trey Lathan was going to kind of have the season that he had at Kansas this year for the Jayhawks, given what I saw on the field in 2024. Even a guy who I didn't name just there, who I thought was the worst cornerback that West Virginia's had since Pat Miller, that being Aiden Garnes, goes to Arizona and actually puts together a half-decent season. Congratulations to Aiden Garnes. That just, for some of these guys, I think that, in the case of C.J. Donaldson, a similar case a little bit in Hudson Clement, Traylon Ray in the same kinds of vein, and Josiah Trotter, they were itching to try and test the waters. I think they had, options to go elsewhere. And obviously Traylon Ray gets picked up by Ole Miss. Hudson Clement goes to a Big Ten program. C.J. Donaldson, the defending national champions in Ohio State. Johnny Williams and Josiah Trotter to an SEC school who probably paid them handsomely in Missouri. You knew Trotter was going to be a star, but it was just like that was the case for them. And then you had a few of those guys, Remek, Altuner, I think they also took Lucas Austin, but he was only a 2-star prospect. And then eventually Gavin Crawford late in the spring, who was an incoming freshman, who all decided to follow Matt Moore down to Virginia Tech. So I think those were some guys that you would have liked to have. You would have liked them to, if the transfer portal did not open the same kind of, if it would have been later, as I've kind of argued, I think would be better for college football, is if you could give some of these first-year head coaches a better, time to get associated with their teams, and the players could get to know the coaches a little bit longer throughout a spring practice season. I think you're kind of better off. Now, are you delaying the inevitable in sometimes of guys who just don't want to be there or aren't good enough, as we've seen West Virginia cast off some players to the G6 and FCS level and so on and so forth? Yes, that's true, but I've heard this argument before from some other former college players who, have their kind of national shows or regional shows, and that's something that I just don't think that this staff was afforded the benefit of the doubt of, to try and sell these players on the potential of the West Virginia program moving forward. Now, you could say that Coach Rodriguez kind of turned off some of these guys, turned off some of the assistant coaches, Matt Moore namely, in the hard edge mentality, and that's been such a soft past of the West Virginia football program, that we're bringing this hard edge mentality back that it's been missing, and maybe that's what, again, turned off some players and coaches to go and pursue opportunities elsewhere. But I don't know necessarily. I just don't think that. And whether Coach Rodriguez said, fine, don't let the door hit you on walking out, or okay, West Virginia gave its best financial offer that it figured it could to a guy like Hudson Clement, and when Illinois said we can beat that, that's what the Illini did, and the rest is history. But that's what kind of the chaos of mid-December to mid-January is. And the other thing, West Virginia was trying to identify transfer portal commits at the same time as understanding its own roster that it did not know. That I think beyond just what it saw in some film of 2024, what it saw in the Coffee Bowl, that this coaching staff didn't have or thought they did, and come to find you learn a whole lot more once you strap on the pads, get them working within your own system over the course of the spring, summer, and beyond, is that it didn't have a great grip on the roster as maybe us fans did. I don't know if maybe, that's maybe the right case here, that coaches get paid millions of dollars, have years worth of dedication to their craft. They know what they're doing better than myself. But just it seemed like that was a narrative that was spoken by Coach Rodriguez, and all of the press conference it seemed like through spring practice, I'm just still trying to learn these guys' names out there. It's it just seemed like it took a very long time for again, getting people hired on board, that's one thing. Getting a new general manager, filling out your entire staff, that's one thing. But then understanding the players and how they build out into your two deep, I do that all the time. And I think if you listen to the other YouTube content creators, that we kind of get it. We kind of get the understanding of it. So I think, though, that they had the impression going in, as while they tried to understand the complete roster strengths and weaknesses, Coach Rodriguez thought back then, this time, 11 months ago, it's okay. There are so many needs from just a total volume standpoint defensively that we need to go whole hog on flooding this team, cornerbacks, safeties, you name it, on the defensive side of the ball. We'll be able to figure it out offensively. We will be okay. I will be able to institute my hard edge, mentality. They will pick up on the system fast. And when you have a returning quarterback in fourth year Nico Marchiol, and then a returning starter at running back in Jaheim White, you figured, okay, At least you have the quarterback, running back nucleus that Coach Rodriguez once had in Pat White and Steve Slayton in the middle 2000s. I'm not saying that they're the same two players. No, not the same. But at least he said, I can make this work. And I really do. I think that was the case. So over time, throughout the winter, throughout the spring, some high school guys, didn't work out. Some, like, I'm thinking a guy who had some 4-star rankings according to some services, and like an Amir Leonard John Charles. Again, Gavin Crawford, who I mentioned, who kind of, I think, just got disenfranchised with the program and went elsewhere to where he wanted to be with his guys and Coach Matt Moore. Ramondo Johnson, who I really liked as a pass rusher. Zod Jackson was, I think, the number 1 or number 2 best player in the state of West Virginia in last year's recruiting cycle. And even some guys that had just a cup of coffee in Morgantown, and like an LJ Turner at running back and Johnny Pescuzzi at tight end. So it was just, I knew that this roster was going to be in flux, that once we got to spring practice, and while at the same time the House settlement was getting codified and signed and agreed upon, so that we had this looming roster limit out into the ether that West Virginia was going to have to cut down to a certain number, that Coach Rodriguez wanted to take the Johnny Majors approach, get this roster as big as humanly possible for the start of August camp, and kind of figure it out from there. So that's how you saw so many late additions after spring practice was over the course of the summer, even into August camp. That's when I think it was really like, oh shit, we really need to go. Jalen Knighton in this situation still like kills me to this day, is you brought in a guy who you were counting on to be your number 2 running back alongside Jaheim White, and declared ineligible academically for the season. So you just, you lost out on a guy who you figured was going to contribute, maybe, half a century in rushing yards, and really spell Jaheim White well. And while you had these legal, issues with the NCAA hung up in your other running back and Ty Edwards. So it was just like, it was kind of a bit of a mess, I feel like, from a roster management perspective. And where I'm willing to give this staff grace is because they were trying to do all this with the hiring and get people onboarded while evaluating the roster, while transfer portal recruiting, while keeping the high school class of the last cycle, intact and evaluated, and whether you want to keep them, while building relationships for this upcoming recruiting cycle. So it was just a lot. I gave them credit way back then and all through the summer. I don't think Coach Rodriguez and anyone on the assistant coaching staff took a day off between probably then till now in the last 12 months and probably still won't before early signing day this upcoming Wednesday. So that's what I mean is I just still think, though, that what was the major oversight during that entire process was the offensive line. And you tried to address this as best as humanly possible with some guys that you retained from last year, and Landon Livingston and Nick Cray. You let Johnny Williams, Tomas Remek, Kyle Altuner, walk, or they left of their own accord to go to Virginia Tech, and they were replaced, or their positions were with Tykees Crawford, who was really let walk the season prior by Arkansas, and then Walter Young-Bear, who it seemed like was a really high-caliber G6 player from Tulsa, and or Kimo Makaneole, who came from LSU but really never found a position at that school and was just kind of really an athlete with a big body, who didn't really figure out the offensive line. And then some other positions of guys who either didn't see the field or didn't see enough of it, in my opinion, and a guy like Malik Agbo, and a guy like Josh Isosa, and a guy like Robbie Martin or Jude Edwards. Now, I know they didn't get to see the field like those opportunities, namely because Landon Livingston and Nick Cray were projects that evolved and got better as the season went along, and then Donovan Haslam kind of came out of nowhere, a recruit from Austin Peay, of all places, at the FCS level, and got better, contributed in that Pitt game with that Mountaineer mash play, and then just got better from there. But just, I don't know if West Virginia had any better viable alternative solutions that they could either invest in, or it was going to cost so much money to try and go out there and get transfer portal recruit, because you weren't getting it from the high school ranks. And if you're starting a true freshman, as I've said, from the high school ranks, you gotta think that they are like 4-star, 5-star caliber or better to go at the age of 18 against, at most times, 22-year-old seniors. They physically have to be there, mentally just like a different breed of player. That's why it's so pivotal that West Virginia has and keeps Kevin Brown. So it's fantastic. So that's what I mean to say, and I think that was a bit of an oversight by this coaching staff this past roster management season. So where it finally came to head was that Ohio game week 2. You get bullied by a MAC team. Your offense just is completely stalled and neutral for 4 quarters. You keeping your defense on the field for too long. This was a theme that really started to hurt West Virginia, later in the season, especially during the middle part where the season started to get off the rails, is that West Virginia's defense didn't have any faith in its offense to move the ball, to make it a competitive, complimentary-esque game out there. And you lose your best player on the entire team to a season-ending injury in that Ohio game in Jaheim White, and maybe your team's second-best receiver at that point in time, Jaden Bray, to injury. So he's done. You lose those 2 guys. That can affect even the best of teams. Knock them down a peg. Imagine Ohio State losing Jeremiah Smith out there, or for anyone who's not a quarterback, it's hard to, think around college football. Who do you think are some of the best skill position players, and just pluck them off your team? And that's how you affect a West Virginia who didn't have too many stars to play with already. So to lose them, but then come back the next week and win the backyard brawl, that is the high point of the season. That was great, and I think it was more so not even just for the players themselves. I think it was for this fan base and everybody who wanted to believe into this brain trust on what the prospects of Mountaineer football could be moving on, to turn the page completely from the Neil Brown era and looking ahead to what Coach Rodriguez is going to do in his second tenure in Morgantown. So I think that was whereas as bad as you feel right now here after that Texas Tech loss, go back to the way that September 13th felt, and the way that team faced adversity in that moment against a Pitt team that, say what you want to say about them, the way that they've finished the season 8-4, fighting for a ACC championship. At that point in time, they necessarily weren't. But for this team to respond that way against Ohio, this is what I'm trying to say is take that moment, and here's why that was so special. But is a learning lesson for this coaching staff, and we kind of already know this, is that you have to be playing for something tangible. Is why I think like this Texas Tech game went off the rails from the get-go, of you're questioning whether they had any motivation going into it at all from the get-go, was that they knew there was a rivalry game. Even though College Game Day wasn't going to be there, bragging rights is you were creating that sign of kind of intangible, ancillary, motivating factor into that one backyard brawl game that you hope that you could bring that every single week. But it's hard to do with today's culture of, the playoff mentality of everybody's trying to play for it's not about the journey, it's about the destination and going to the college football playoff. And once you lost already to Ohio, what were your chances? Doubt crept in from the get-go. If you won that Ohio game, then you win the backyard brawl, you're 3-0, you're going into Big 12 conference play. Maybe it wouldn't have turned into the same kind of a season. Like, you needed to win that Ohio game, in my opinion. I think that one and I think the UCF game were the two games, and I'll talk about that one in a second as we get to it in the chronology of the season, that were two of those games that you just wish you could go back and, like, man, you really you wish you had those two games. So to win the backyard brawl, you have to try and create that, whether it's, I think that's why we have, in addition to selling merchandise and the money factor, having these, blackout uniform coal rush games, or we have, you're just trying to create, the fear of missing out kind of for these Gen Z type players. I know that they're playing for money now, so the sport has never been more professionalized, and I'll talk about that aspect in a second. But it's just like I don't know how to explain this. I'm trying to do the best that I can, but because of the professionalization factor that seems to have crept into college football, there isn't this same desire. And I mean, like, you can argue this with me. I'd love to hear your, not from I would say if anyone who was a current player or a recent, either graduate or so on, but sometimes I have a feeling that the players don't care as much about the fans, about the wins or losses, because they're still getting paid at the end of the day. They're still living the Division I college football player lifestyle, getting to travel the country, do what they love. They have great, residential facilities, not just West Virginia. I'm talking about nationwide. They're getting paid, free education. Like, I went to college, so I know that is really such a great time and era of your life, with not the kind of responsibilities that you have as a, adult, like who's out of college. So it's just like sometimes when we eat, sleep, breathe, think about, all that goes into, our love for West Virginia football. Sometimes I just think this has been a recent phenomenon with the invention of the transfer portal and NIL, is that the desire each and every week to get up for games like Utah or games like Colorado. Like, they don't inspire the same type of get up that they do as Pitt. And and even if it's not Pitt, anybody else, can you create that week in and week out? That's a challenge. I think that, and as long as, if you're not playing for a contention of a conference championship, you can lose sight of that. So that has to be first and foremost. It feels, and like that's the thing, is if you're out of it as early as September or very early in October, how do you keep those players motivated when now the national narrative around college football is it's playoff or bust? The bowl games don't matter. So many players opt out already. Like, there's not this kind of, again, buy into the journey beyond the destination of the college football playoff, that you want to go out there and win each and every week. I hear that from the coaches. Don't get me wrong. I get that. I hear that from the coaches. But I wish that were a little bit more, more spoken loudly by the players. And I wonder how many say those in front of a public camera, and how many, what's the reality of the situation behind the scenes. If I was a fly on the wall in the Pushkar Center, are there as many guys who just truly love football and love playing and those are the ones who I think like really stand out and then become those, loved players within a program. Are there fewer of them today than there were, 10, 20 years ago, of the millennial generation? That's what I'd love to know. I would love to just experience that. So back to the backyard brawl, you have this, a one-game incredible experience by Ty Edwards. Like, how about that he comes out there and runs for 3 touchdowns, over 100 yards, tears it up. But in the process of that game, he goes out there and suffers a traumatic hip injury that's going to keep him out for pretty much the rest of the season. Like, how do you control that? So now you've down 3 running backs. So Jaheim White gone, Jalen Knighton, sorry we never knew ye. and then Ty Edwards, you lose basically all there by September 13th. What are you supposed to do? And then your offense, once he's out next week against Kentucky, your offensive line still can't get a push up front, and you don't have a big enough back to kind of plow through and make his own holes and create yards after contact. The defense of Kansas goes all after Nico Marchiol. He gets hurt. And then, unfortunately, Nico Marchiol, whether he truly, I think what happened is, and I've said this now a couple of times, so reiterating a point for those who have heard it before, Nico Marchiol did suffer an injury. I think anyone can understand that. Now, how significant to the degree of playing through pain, you're hurt but not necessarily injured, that's what we don't know. That's what's kind of, we don't have the full story on that. I've read mixed reporting on that. But for them to leave Morgantown, go seeing your own doctors, did in that process, he kind of piss off the coaching staff and that point of time of thinking like that he's walking away from the team, especially when On3's Pete Nakos reports that he intends to self-redshirt and enter the transfer portal. So whether you believe that report or we haven't heard anything from Nico himself, since that period of time. Players don't usually speak during the regular season, it seems like, on social media, but I know all these guys have it. So like he could have kind of quieted the room there. And so now you've lost your best overall player on the team in Jaheim White, and now your redshirt junior, so I'll call him senior leader, starting quarterback, and Nico Marchiol kind of quits on the team. So you're in flux. I think that's what's kind of, at that point in time, with the struggles of the offensive line. We saw this over the Utah game, over the BYU game, and Kansas games too, that Jalen Henderson wasn't the answer. Max Brown couldn't stay healthy enough to stay on the field. And Khalil Wilkins, I just don't buy necessarily right now that he's a good enough passer to play at the Division I Power 4 level at quarterback. Good enough athlete, super athlete for Rich Rodriguez's system, but as a passer. So now you're down to your true freshman quarterback with a really shaky offensive line. So now the defense at that point in time realized it doesn't matter how good of an effort we play in, series out, game out that we play, our offense is not going to do enough to do for us to compete. So I think that was just really, truly demoralizing for those guys. And I think the coaches probably did everything they could to motivate them to keep fighting. But as we've seen too many times, it feels like throughout the last, at least my lifetime of Mountaineer football, it's just difficult when in any given year, West Virginia's offense is really good or its defense isn't up to snuff, or vice versa. So I think that kind of put a sour taste in the mouths of the defense, and then that's what then affected them in the second half of the season. So then you get to the UCF game, and what I truly don't understand, I think that was the weirdest. I wish more. I hope Coach Rodriguez, if he does any sort of like final wrap type of show or press conference on the season, I would like to know more about that situation of what kind of happened there in the middle of the season, in that bye week, to then set up for how poor of a performance that you had against UCF to then come home for homecoming and you turn it on against TCU. I'm glad it happened. It's just so strange to me that you look so bad. Continuation of what we saw the 3 prior weeks with Kansas, Utah, and BYU against a UCF team that didn't finish bowl eligible for this year. So you think you'd love to have that one back. Same with Ohio. But then you turn it on against TCU, and that's where I was really proud of the guys. I think that's where Mountaineer Nation really started to believe. Still showed up on a Cole Rush homecoming game. Made Josh Hoover look really human, look really pedestrian as a quarterback, came rushing out there after him. And that was a more talented TCU team. But you played well enough to win that game. at different points just couldn't close. So, and then you got to see a 300-yard passing performance out of your true freshman quarterback. So, okay, there's some buy-in, there's some belief. You got Dior Hubbard kind of stepping up and Sincere Bowers kind of playing a secondary role. So you're kind of starting to figure it out. Then you go on the road, you beat Houston, who was a ranked opponent, seeking revenge from 2023 when you lost on a Hail Mary. You played against a Houston team that really didn't play poorly, it seemed like, in that contest. West Virginia just played really, really well on both sides of the ball, offense, defense, so you saw what that team was capable of. They parlayed that into a home win against Colorado, against Juju Lewis. Then they went on the road and played against Arizona State, and that's where I think the defensive attrition and wear and tear really started to add up, because it was that second quarter. I was at this game, so that's when Arizona State really just started to take advantage of West Virginia, despite West Virginia owning the time of the possession in the first half. Yeah, came up short on a goal line stand on fourth and 1. Credit Arizona State's defense on that play. I sound like Neil Brown. And it's just, there are just such small things. I go back to like the 2014 game against Alabama in the season opener. Just came down to Clint Trickett in a few small plays here and there. So as Coach Rodriguez said, this much, that's the difference of them winning and losing that game. So by losing that game, then going into a bye week, and then coming out against Texas Tech, the toughest opponent you had on your entire schedule, with truly nothing to play for at that point in time, and already some reports coming out that they, have talked to the players that they want to retain for the next season. I just think everybody's heads were in so many different places other than that 3 hours on the field at Milan Puskar Stadium. So I'm not trying to put too much of an emphasis or too much credence into that game itself, but it's just an example of, again, I think this is just a tragedy of the day and age of college football as we're already on to next season. Like, look at Ole Miss right now with the Lane Kiffin situation. You're already on to, next season before this season's even ending, because there's only such of a care onto the postseason with the college football play. If you're not good enough to make the playoff, well, it just seems like what was the point of the season even playing for? Even for the guys, even for the teams who are the beauty pageant champions and recruiting rankings, like a Texas, saying that the games don't matter from the regular season. It's about how they look and how they're playing by the end of the regular season, the end of November. So that's what I think is just getting lost, and I'm feeling a little bit sick from about college football these days, is just feeling like the regular season doesn't matter. And while us fans go out there and we're told by the schools to buy season tickets, be there every single week, support your team, support your NIL, collective, your athletic department, that kind of a scheme. So that's where I think also want to know some more about from Coach Rodriguez's bye weeks, how these teams didn't respond to bye weeks. That's usually a time when it seems like teams are supposed to get healthy, start to, iron some things out that might be affecting them. And then also just the schedule this year. The schedule this year just didn't pay any favors to West Virginia in its challenge of a good year of the Big 12 Conference. But I'll come back to that. So now, kind of putting the 2025 season in context, 38 minutes in, I think let's talk about some of the things, because I don't think it's even worth going through any of my predictions from the beginning of the regular season, thinking where I thought West Virginia would be better than it would, talking about statistics and how West Virginia didn't live up to that, just because we kind of see what happened. It was the offensive line, the woes that they had up front, that then affected the offense, got them stuck in neutral, which then affected the psyche of the defense early on in the season, and just not feeling like the offense was going to be able to support them to make games competitive. And then by the time that the offense finally got ready to be able to compete, the pass defense especially the last couple of weeks getting tore up by Jeff Sims, also getting tore up by Houston. Juju Lewis threw deep through the air, and then of course this last game against Texas Tech as the pass defense just, I feel like, completely fell apart. That West Virginia was just getting torched through the air, and West Virginia's offense, okay, if you're going to give up big chunk plays, give up easy drives, easy points, that West Virginia's offense couldn't score it in bunches like that you needed to win, especially against Texas Tech, and then just finishing, I feel like, in those red zone opportunities against Arizona State. So some things I would say, if we're wrapping up, that we can learn from the 2025 season that will pay off for West Virginia into 2026. I think for first and foremost, stability and familiarity of this team will pay dividends. You don't have this kind of learning curve for Coach Rodriguez and the rest of the assistants and recruiting staff to have to understand this entire roster from man, number 1 to man number 110. You kind of know what you're dealing with. You know what you're dealing with at this point, so you know how you truly need to shape this roster to fit what you want to do. Now you're not trying to fit square pegs in round holes, like in the case that I feel like with Nico Marchiol at quarterback, even though it's such a Nico defender, just not fitting the system of what Coach Rodriguez wants to do for whatever reason that he can't adapt. If he can't adapt to the players, or can't adapt in the similar kind of way that, like, say, a Coach Cignetti did for Indiana a few years ago, or some other ones who have kind of had the first-year success that you wish that West Virginia would have had better than in 2025, and at least get to 6-6 by beating beating Ohio and beating Ohio U, beating UCF, or coming away with that win against Arizona State to get to bowl eligibility, then fine. Then go out there and get the guys that you need to fit your system. Now, when I say stability and familiarity, that would essentially mean, Carson, that you want to give everybody on this coaching staff a pass on this season and keep them around for 2026. Well, not necessarily. I think there are two guys that just kind of reading between the lines, that are kind of on the hot seat already. First, I think it's Pat Kirkland. Watching a lot of games of West Virginia's on TV, I don't think I saw another assistant coach get chewed out as much as Pat Kirkland by Coach Rodriguez. I don't know if it was just like the camera found Coach Rodriguez at his most pissed off points when he was talking to Coach Kirkland, but just by the way that happened with that Texas Tech fake, I got to call it a fake punt return play, because that's essentially what it was, because West Virginia didn't get lined up fast enough over where the muddle huddle was for them to just flip the ball over to the side and make an alley, and he picks up the first down easily. So I think that's unacceptable. I think the Emmanuel Henderson Jr. Kickoff return for a touchdown against Kansas, just these little things here and there, the 2-point conversion that Arizona State scored on West Virginia, that I just think that there were too many slip-ups on special teams, and you didn't get anything really better from Preston Fox in the return game last year to this year. Cade Hensley kind of turned it on in the second half, and Ollie Straw was kind of all over the place with his punts this year. Some games amazing, some games not so, like pretty below average. I don't know if West Virginia will go to an external option for a special teams coordinator in 2026, but I would say so. And then also I think it's just going to be a hard determination on Jack Bicknell. I really still do think that his number one offensive line coach that he wanted was Coach Rick Trickett from Jacksonville State, deciding to stay down there with the brain trust of who have some Mountaineer ties down there in Jacksonville State, and they put together a pretty decent season without him. So if he can't get Coach Trickett and can't make a second attempt to try and get him again in Morgantown, do you want to explore other options than Coach Bicknell? Because just the way that it ended yesterday, a lot of the same things that were were really hurting West Virginia, it seemed like. early on in the season seemed to rear their ugly head. That offensive line play, and I know you're going against the best front seven you faced all season in Texas Tech, but that offensive line couldn't get a push up front, couldn't pass protect Scotty Fox on that day, couldn't get a push up front against to carve any running lanes for Sincere Bowers. So I think I saw some moderate improvements by Nick Cray and Landon Livingston, Donovan Haslam on the season, but not enough to say that, like, hey, if you can't explore a better alternative. Now you have a lot, some really good high school recruits coming in. So that's where I'm saying I don't know if you want to upset the stability, get their commitments inked and sign them and then move on, or do you want to keep him around, give him another shot? If you can add better talent on the offensive line, then he can finally show what he can do as a coach. I don't know. That's for Coach Rodriguez to decide. I also would say, number 2, the approach of high-quality G5 players and or Power 4 players who haven't really played at their previous institution is very high risk, very high reward of a gamble. That using that is kind of the general approach that West Virginia's taken for several seasons now. You have to pay for high quality Power 4 guys if you want to bring them over in the transfer portal, just like free agents at the NFL level. So you can't count on, I feel like many more than about 10. That like the best programs across the country. So while I can have differences in opinion within Mountaineer Nation of whether the better approach for this offseason is to go out there and sign a 35-person high school recruiting class or larger and bringing in a smaller transfer portal recruiting class. But I just think that, hopefully with the right talent identifiers and evaluators in that recruiting room from a staffing perspective, that they can go out there and they can find more Michael Coates's, Chase Wilson's out there than you do find of Kimo Makaneole's and Jamore Robinson's. So it's a boom or bust proposition and it's one that, man, if you spend the NIL war chest on going out there and going and get them, you have to have, I feel like, more of a firm commitment that those guys are going to actually pan out. So I tend to agree with this way that Coach Rodriguez is going with high school recruiting to try and build them up from freshmen, develop them, retain the good ones, keep them around by having them in more years into the program, fit the system, get the culture that it's going to pay off when they're older in their years. But why didn't, and I guess I'm playing devil's advocate with myself here, which can kind of throw me in circles, but it's like I wish West Virginia could have done that 12 months ago. That'll pay off for this season. But again, Coach Rodriguez didn't get hired before signing day of last year. So that's where it's like, okay, it almost is kind of a bit of a year zero for West Virginia in that regard, because he truly, couldn't get those his guys, which ones that he could get. He was dealing with so many different things throughout December, January, and hit on some and then didn't hit on some. So I'm willing to give him a pass. Was willing to give him a pass when he got hired for this first year. So I'm sticking by him, staying true. I'm not going to be a hypocrite on that regard. I also think you need some things to break your way, and we'll see how this now. I think that James Franklin getting hired from Penn State now at Virginia Tech complicates things, but it's now already yielded one player in Kevin Brown getting to go to West Virginia. Let's see if any more. If Kyle Altuner doesn't want to play, Matt Moore isn't retained by Coach Franklin, then Kyle Altuner hits the transfer portal. Boom, West Virginia could get a high quality guy at guard position to come back potentially to the program. But that's what I'm saying is I wonder, you need something. West Virginia has been eaten up so much by the transfer portal in recent years. It's time freaking finally for something right to go West Virginia's way, and I hope this is what what's happened to Penn State, what's happened to Virginia Tech, what's happened, in other spots across college football, that West Virginia can be one that's a benefactor and not someone who loses out because of a coaching change like that. So we'll see. We'll have to see how that goes in the next couple of weeks. Also, I think just bigger, faster, and stronger from the players who are going to return You heard this out of Coach Rodriguez after yesterday's game and his press conference. I can't help but read between a bit of the lines and speculate that this might mean that West Virginia might be making a change at strength and conditioning director. Mike Joseph has been there a very long time. And, from all of the former Mountaineers who have played through the system say he is not the problem. He is only, he's really, a good strength and conditioning coach out there. But I just can't help but feel that Coach Rodriguez wants his fingerprints across this entire program. He made a bunch of changes this past off season. Now he's been there seeing what has and what hasn't worked. And I think that the only way to the only ways I feel like to get bigger, faster, stronger are to recruit bigger, faster, stronger players, which it seems like he's doing by reading the rosters and where they're coming from and stuff like that. And then what are you doing in your strength and conditioning program? Does that have any downstream effects on the injury situation? Like that's what I think is a little bit curious, that I can't get my finger on the pulse on that. Or were the former players of Neil Brown that were still on this team so used to such a routine and so used to the way that they did things that, again, with all of the flux that was happening with roster management and getting the staff hired and so on and so forth, that now can put more of an emphasis, I feel like, on this year's strength and conditioning program, that either another coach is going to be hired or, again, going to clean house and put in his guys who he wants. I don't know if Mike Barwis is going to come out of his own main business to come back and be the strength and conditioning director at West Virginia, but I'm sure Pat McAfee and Coach Rodriguez himself would sign up to write that check to bring him back in. So you just wonder if that's going to pay off next year. If a move is made, I'm saying, I don't know. But I just kind of feel that way reading the room. And then I would really wonder if West Virginia would benefit from a pass game coordinator. I get it that Rhett Rodriguez, I think he was a valedictorian at University of Arizona, coach's son, knows this system, played in it as a player himself, but I look at, like, okay, if you're trying to move on from, say, a Jack Bicknell on your offensive line, I think the home run hit that West Virginia, because Coach Rod isn't going to go out there on the offensive side of the ball and hire a guy that he's not familiar with. I can tell you that right now. I just got that vibe, got that feeling that's the way he's the dictator when it comes to his offense. So he's going to run it his way or the highway. But he might listen to guys that are his former players. So a guy I look at right here is Garen Justice. I said his name a year ago. Could go Ryan Stanchek, who's also in the same kind of position. Offensive coordinator, run game coordinator is Garen Justice at SMU, and I think a different title, or maybe just offensive line coach, is Ryan Stanchek at UTEP. But they got to have different schemes or plays, some things that they've run at, say, an SMU or a UTEP that might be just a bit different than what Coach Rodriguez is running, that's part of his call sheet, that he would say, hey, Coach, would you think about this, or how do you feel about this play? Does this I really like this concept. I really like this play design when we were running it at SMU or UTEP. Would you consider it? You can only, if you're not the head coach, you can only, here's my recommendations, doing what he says. And I'm sure Garen has a really good gig going for him for Coach Rhett Lashley, who has a lot of coaching stability with an extension down there at SMU. But would you come back to your alma mater if the same kind of position opened it up? That's what I'd want to know. Because I just think that this passing game and the play calling just needs a little bit of a modern, just a little bit of tweaks. Just, I think with better players is going to result in better results on the field. Trust me, truly, I do. But I also just think that a little bit of tweaks to the offense into the 21st century, with more of an emphasis on passing versus the run game, and the pass setting up the run rather than the run setting up the pass. That I think, like, it's good sometimes, generally, to have differences in opinion in the room, Coach Rodriguez can either decide to take them or not take them. And from a former player like Garen Justice, who's worked his way up the ranks all the way to a program like SMU, that was in the college football playoff last year and has had really good offenses the last couple of years with players from the state of Texas and having some of those recruiting ties too. Love to have him in Morgantown, but we'll see. And then the last thing, I stick by this, and I think this is just an appropriate place for me to say this at this point in time, that getting out of the Big 12. And I know, unfortunately, this is just a moot point. So, Carson, why are you even wasting your time in talking about this? Because of the grant of rights and the media rights deals, that until conference realignment comes along in 2030, 2031, there's no point in even talking about this. And yeah, you're still right, but it's common knowledge to me that pretty logical to me, that I think that West Virginia would be more of an achieving program if it played against its traditional Eastern and geographic rivals in the ACC versus playing against these Great Plains, Mountain West time zone schools and playing in the Big 12. They're harder. I fight with my Pitt fan friends about this all the time, about the differences between the ACC and the Big 12, but truly West Virginia is facing harder competition, an uphill climb, and battling against these, the Kansas States, before this year, Oklahoma State, now Texas Tech is a power, BYU, Utah. It's just hard. It just took me all the way to Tempe, Arizona, to finally realize that in person, that it makes absolutely no frickin' sense for a team in Morgantown, West Virginia, to be playing a team in conference play in Tempe, Arizona, when you're not playing against a team in College Park, Maryland, or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or Syracuse, New York, or Blacksburg, Virginia. It just does not make sense, and it just doesn't fit. So until I hope that West Virginia can continue to cut against the grain, to try and make its mark, because now this is another year of 7 straight years of not having a week ranked and just falling more and more into, I feel like, irrelevancy in college football, that West Virginia has to try and prove now, with so much stacked against it being in this Big 12 conference, that it can contend for a conference championship, can win it for a few years, and then when college football realigns, that they can have themselves positioned to say, when this new Super League forms, that, hey, we are one of the top, I feel like, 48 to 60 schools in the country that deserve to be a part of this new Division I. I hate to say it, but you have work cut out for you in 2026 to 2030. You really do. So I hope West Virginia learns some lessons. I hope it's not so proud. The administration is not so proud of itself to think things can't be changed, that we have to do things the way that it's always been done, or I know how to fix it, without listening to some of these, alternative perspectives, and put their nose to the grindstone, and they go out there and get players. And then work hard between now and next late August, early September, and can take the field again. So, giving you a lot to think about, almost an hour here. Let me know in the comments, good, bad, or indifferent. If you've liked this video, please like it so more Mountaineer fans can see it across YouTube. Would love to have you a subscriber to my channel as we get into the roster management season for football. Talk more about basketball, and thankfully, Mountaineer basketball team is back on the winning streak. Winning today, beating Mercyhurst, a Division II program. And then would love to have you a subscriber to my channel. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog that I do this each and every week and have a lot of fun doing it. Hail West Virginia, brighter days to come, Mountaineer Nation. Let's go. Spot the ball.